Games that are universally beloved or disliked obviously often live long in the memory, but games that strongly divide opinions tend to have just as much staying power, if not more. With people falling on every side of the fence in this debate about how good these games are, or aren't, discussions about them never really fully die down. Here, we're going to talk about a few such single-player titles. The Last of Us Part 2. We had to start with this one, because it's hard to think of many games that have ever been as divisive as The Last of Us Part 2. From a gameplay and design perspective, there's little to dislike about the stealth horror action adventure gem, but its story was one that continues to provoke strong reactions one way or another to this day. With half-true spoilers leaking out before the game came out, The Last of Us Part 2 seemed like it was on this path even before the launch. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Hideo Kojima has a knack for directing games that people are either going to love or hate, except, of course, when he creates ones that just everyone universally loves, and Metal Gear Solid 5 is surely one of those divisive works, which is putting it mildly. From not being a finished product to controversial narrative decisions, there was plenty about The Phantom Pain that rubbed many the wrong way.
This pain is ours, and no one else's. The secret weapon we wield, out of sight.
At the same time, gameplay-wise, it was nothing short of a revelation, so you're always going to get plenty of people telling you that it's one of the best stealth games ever made. Batman: Arkham Knight. You know a trilogy is an all-timer when its weakest installment is supposedly Arkham Knight, but compared to just how ubiquitous the love for Arkham Asylum and City was, Knight definitely had way more detractors. From predictable twists and revelations related to the central villain, to a bloated open world with an excess of repeated side activities, to, of course, its controversial implementation of the Batmobile, Arkham Knight stumbled in enough areas for many to take issues with it.
What you gonna do with your...
Fallout 4. For about a decade or so, Bethesda consistently delivered genre-defining open-world RPGs, with the likes of Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, and Skyrim. But Fallout 4 was definitely a step down from that. It was, of course, still a great game in its own right, thanks in large part to its compelling world. But there were many who felt that it shed too much of what made Bethesda RPGs great, from the simplified progression mechanics to the poorly implemented dialogue wheel. Starfield. In hindsight, the consensus on Fallout 4 has grown a lot stronger with time, and it's fair to say that Starfield has contributed to that by being significantly more divisive. With renewed emphasis on player choice and role-playing mechanics and a rich sci-fi setting, there is a lot to love about Bethesda's spacefaring epic. At the same time, it's also got its fair share of detractors, drawing criticism for the segmented structure of its world, how much emphasis it places on procedural generation, its technical issues, and more. Grand Theft Auto 4. Even GTA 4, one of the highest rated and best-selling games of all time, can end up being a divisive game, which in fact became clear within weeks of its release back in 2008. Its move to a new engine, its compelling story, and its obsessively detailed open world drew widespread praise. But GTA 4 also represented a shift in tone for the franchise, with a larger focus on grittier storytelling, in sharp contrast to the goofier, over-the-top style of its predecessors, and its successor. For many, that felt antithetical to the whole point of the franchise. Days Gone. Days Gone fandom has continued to grow in the time since its release. Its systemic open world is one that constantly encourages players to engage with the plethora of content it has on offer, and from its bike-related survival-light mechanics to the freaker hordes, it uses its post-apocalyptic settings in some really interesting ways. It was, however, a technically rough game, and that roughness translated to some gameplay and storytelling areas as well, which meant that there were many that it just failed to stick the landing for. Rise of the Ronin. Team Ninja's first crack at the open-world genre hasn't enjoyed the sort of widespread acclaim that the developer saw with, say, the Neo games, Rise of the Ronin launched recently for PS5 and was on the receiving end of criticism directed at its generic open world, rough storytelling, and technical deficiencies. It does, however, have plenty of staunch defenders, thanks in large part to its excellent combat, typically enough for a Team Ninja game, and the consistently enjoyable traversal mechanics. Dark Souls 2. Probably the weirdest and most experimental of all From Software Souls-likes, Dark Souls 2 is considered by many to be the legendary studio's black sheep. It's received plenty of criticism for everything, from larger issues like its level design and inconsistent difficulty balancing to relatively smaller ones to frequently unreliable hit detection. It is, however, also one of the more mechanically interesting games in the series. Is it rougher around the edges than its peers? Perhaps, but to many that's what makes it stand out more. Resident Evil 3 Remake. After 2019's RE2 remake, exceptions from Resident Evil 3's own remake were sky high, but the game ended up falling short of many of them. Nemesis wasn't at all the terrifying pursuer enemy that many had hoped he would be. Significant portions of the original game had been cut out, and for many, the game was just too short. At the end of the day, it was still a fun, well-produced, polished survival horror game in its own right, but by not hitting the level of quality that most other horror games have in recent years, it became a notable low spot in the genre, a fair few that played it. The Order 1886. Sony's first-party output was firing on all cylinders in the second half of the PS4's lifecycle, but its early efforts were so much more hit and miss. The Order 1886 was a perfect example of that. Ready at Dawn's third-person shooter was an absolutely gorgeous-looking game, all on top of boasting a fascinating setting and solid cinematic storytelling. That endeared it to many, but it was also deemed by a large section of its player base to be not only too short, but also bland and unimaginative from a gameplay perspective. Final Fantasy XVI. Final Fantasy XVI was pretty much guaranteed to always be divisive. Are you going to find a large number of players who will swear by its stylish combat, stellar production values, and standard-setting boss fights? Absolutely you will. You will, however, also find just as many people who will call out the game's extreme streamlining of role-playing mechanics, and how bland many of its side quests were.
Together! Stay down.
Silent Hill 4: The Room. Silent Hill 2 was the last time we got a Silent Hill game that was universally liked, unless you want to count PT. But Silent Hill 4: The Room is perhaps the most divisive of them all. It's a game of incredibly high highs, but also depressingly low lows. It's got weirdly designed puzzles, frustrating design choices, and key narrative beats that just don't hit at all. But it balances that scale with some genuinely chilling psychological horror, top-notch visuals, especially for the time, and memorable story moments. Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3 is surely an obvious pick for a list such as this one, to the point of it being unavoidable. After the incredible heights BioWare touched with Mass Effect 2, expectations from the trilogy conclusion were in the stratosphere. But thanks to a controversial ending, and much less emphasis being placed on choice and consequence mechanics than expected, the backlash against the RPG shooter was strong.
Now, go, go!
Mass Effect 3's fans, however, of which there are a fair few, will tell you that in spite of those issues, thanks to its tight shooting mechanics, thrilling set pieces and combat encounters, and an excellent cast of characters, it was still one hell of a game. Death Stranding. It makes sense to sign off with another Hideo Kojima game. With Death Stranding, Kojima and his team once again ended up delivering the sort of game that not many had expected them to, and that once again proved to split opinions. To many, Death Stranding's surreal post-apocalyptic world, its collaborative and asynchronous multiplayer, and its zen gameplay loop make it an unforgettable experience. Then again, there are those who, simply put, just find it a bit boring. With Death Stranding 2 coming up, it should be interesting to see how Kojima Productions builds on the first game's foundations. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.